90% of men think they know how to connect with a woman, but they're missing the one thing that actually matters, and it's silently pushing her away. Today we're going to fix that. What if everything you thought you knew about attraction was incomplete? What if the reason she slowly pulls away, becomes distant, or stops responding the way she once did has nothing to do with what you say, but everything to do with what you don't understand? Today we're going to uncover something most men never learn, something that quietly shapes every relationship from the very beginning. Female psychology is not random. It follows patterns, emotional triggers, and subtle signals that are always present if you know where to look. Let me begin with a truth that may challenge what you believe. There isn't just one way to connect with a woman. And more importantly, there are specific areas, not just physical but deeply emotional, that influence how she feels long before her body reacts. Most men, if they're honest, only recognize a few of these. Some don't even realize they exist. After decades of studying relationships and observing real couples, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Men often rely on instinct. They assume that if they touch the right place, the reaction will follow. But for women, it doesn't work like that. Attraction doesn't begin with touch. It begins with emotional safety. Without that foundation, even the most confident actions can feel empty or disconnected from her perspective. Let me ask you something simple but powerful. Do you truly know how and where a woman wants to be touched? Not the obvious answers most people jump to, but the subtle, almost invisible gestures that make her feel understood, valued, and emotionally open. Most men believe they know their partner well. But when faced with this question, hesitation takes over. That silence says everything. The reason is simple. No one ever explained this clearly. There's no guidebook, no direct instructions, and women themselves don't always verbalize these needs. Instead, they communicate in ways that are easy to miss, through their posture, their eyes, their pauses, and the energy they give or withdraw. Today we're beginning a journey into 7 key emotional zones. But understand this, these are not just parts of the body. They are gateways into her emotional world. When approached with awareness and intention, something powerful begins to shift. Your actions stop feeling routine and start becoming a language she can truly feel. And that's where everything starts to change. Because the moment you understand this, you begin to see relationships differently. You realize that what feels natural to you may not feel meaningful to her. And that gap, that silent misunderstanding, is where emotional distance quietly begins. Over the years, one truth has repeated itself again and again. Most men believe they are doing the right thing. They show effort, they initiate contact, they try to create moments. But from a woman's perspective, something often feels missing. Not because the action is wrong, but because the intention behind it isn't fully felt. Women don't respond to movement alone. They respond to presence, to awareness, to the feeling that you are truly there with them in that moment. You may have asked yourself at some point, why doesn't she react the way she used to? Why does her energy feel different now, less engaged, less responsive? The answer is not complicated. What men often take for granted rarely creates emotion for women. Repetition without connection slowly loses its impact. Familiarity without depth becomes routine, and routine rarely inspires emotional openness. There was a woman who once said something that stayed with me for years. She explained it in the simplest way possible. Don't touch me just to touch me. Let me feel that you're really there first. That one sentence reveals more than any theory ever could. It reminds us that physical contact on its own is not enough. It must carry meaning, attention, and emotional presence. This is where most people get it wrong. They focus on the physical act and forget the psychological door that needs to open first. Without that door, even the right action can feel disconnected. But when that door opens, even the smallest gesture can create a powerful emotional response. So before we move into the specific zones, you need to understand this foundation clearly. This is not about technique, it is about awareness. It is about slowing down, observing her reactions, and recognizing the subtle signals she gives you every day. Because when you begin to notice these signals, everything shifts. You stop guessing and you start understanding. And once that understanding begins to grow, the way you connect with her will never feel the same again. And once that understanding begins to grow, the way you connect with her will never feel the same again. Because now you're no longer acting on guesswork, you're acting with awareness. And this is exactly where we begin with the first zone. One that most men overlook completely, yet it holds more emotional power than they realize. The hands. It sounds simple, almost too simple to matter. But a woman's hands are deeply connected to her emotional state. The way you hold them, the pace, the pressure, even the warmth, all of it communicates something without a single word being spoken. When you take her hand slowly, gently, without urgency, you're not just making contact. You're creating a moment of calm, a signal that says you're present and attentive. A soft movement along her fingers, a steady and warm touch in her palm. These small actions can create a surprising depth of connection. It's not about intensity, it's about intention. In many long-term relationships I've observed, couples who continue this simple habit, holding hands even after years together, maintain a stronger emotional bond. And this isn't coincidence. Physical contact like this releases oxytocin, the hormone linked to trust and connection, reinforcing a sense of emotional safety. But there's a detail many men ignore, and it matters more than they think. Several women have expressed that neglected hands, whether cold, rough, or inattentive, can completely break the moment. Something as basic as clean, warm, and well-cared-for hands can make a significant difference. It's a small detail, but it shapes how your presence is felt. Now let's move to the second zone, the nape of the neck. This area right at the hairline carries a different kind of significance. It's not about stimulation, it's about release. This is where tension quietly builds throughout the day, often without her even noticing. When you touch this area slowly and gently, without expectation, the body begins to relax almost instantly. There was a man who once felt completely disconnected in his marriage. One evening, without planning anything, he simply placed his hand softly on his wife's neck as she stood quietly. She paused, exhaled deeply, and in that moment something shifted between them. That's the power of understanding where emotion truly begins. That's the power of understanding where emotion truly begins. Because once you see it, you realize connection is built in the smallest, quietest moments, not the obvious ones. And from here, we move into the third zone, an area that speaks without words but carries a strong emotional message when approached correctly. The lower back, specifically the space between the waist and the hips. This area represents stability and reassurance. When you place your hands here gently without gripping or controlling, it communicates something subtle but powerful. It says, "I'm here with you," without taking away her sense of freedom. The key is softness, no pressure, no force, just a calm presence that she can feel. This gesture works best in ordinary moments, not during dramatic situations, but in the quiet parts of everyday life. Standing together in the kitchen, walking side by side, or simply being close in silence. When your chest is near her back and your hands rest there naturally, it creates a feeling of comfort and security. No words are needed, and that's exactly why it works so well. Now, let's move to the fourth zone, behind the ear and along the jawline. This is a highly sensitive area, but it only responds positively when trust already exists. If approached too quickly or with too much intensity, it can feel uncomfortable. But when done with warmth and lightness, it creates a completely different experience. A gentle touch here doesn't just feel physical, it carries emotional meaning. One woman described it in a way that perfectly captures its effect. She said it didn't make her feel desired in the usual sense, it made her feel valued. And for many women, that feeling comes before anything else. Being valued creates openness, and openness allows deeper connection to develop naturally. These zones are not about rushing toward a reaction. They are about building an environment where she feels safe enough to respond on her own. When you slow down and approach with awareness, even the smallest gesture becomes meaningful. And as we move forward, the next zone reveals something even deeper about trust, something many people overlook entirely. And as we move forward, the next zone reveals something even deeper about trust, something many people overlook entirely. Because it's not visible in the way other gestures are, yet its impact can be felt almost instantly when approached with sincerity. The area between the shoulder blades. This part of the body carries a unique psychological meaning. It represents protection. It's a place she cannot see herself, which makes it even more sensitive to how it's approached. When you rest your hand there gently without movement or pressure, it sends a quiet message of reassurance. It tells her that she's supported, that she doesn't have to stay guarded in that moment. What makes this zone so powerful is that it isn't associated with desire in the usual sense. It's not about creating excitement, it's about creating calm. When her nervous system begins to slow down, when her mind feels less tense, that's when deeper emotional openness begins. Many men overlook this because they expect immediate visible reactions. But this kind of connection works internally, shaping how she feels over time rather than in a single moment. Now we move to the sixth zone, one that requires a completely different level of awareness. The inner thighs, specifically near the knees. It's important to understand this clearly. This is not about crossing boundaries. It is about respecting them while gently approaching the space between distance and closeness. This area acts as a bridge, not a destination. When approached slowly and respectfully, it communicates something very specific. It says, "I'm close, but I respect your pace." That message is incredibly important. Many men skip this step entirely, moving too quickly without realizing what they're losing in the process. Emotional trust is built in transitions, not in sudden actions. When you ignore the transition, the connection feels rushed instead of natural. These zones are not meant to create pressure or expectation. They are meant to guide the experience in a way that feels comfortable and safe for her. Every small gesture either builds trust or quietly weakens it. And now we arrive at the final zone, the one that brings everything together and reveals the deepest level of emotional connection. And now we arrive at the final zone, the one that brings everything together and reveals the deepest level of emotional connection, because this is where instinct, vulnerability, and trust all meet at once. The lower abdomen around the navel. This area is often misunderstood or completely ignored, yet it holds a powerful emotional significance. It is not just a physical space. It represents her inner world, where emotion and instinct are closely connected. Approaching this zone requires complete sincerity. There can be no hesitation, no hidden intention, no pressure, only calm, steady presence. When you place your hand here gently, with warmth and care, it communicates something far deeper than attraction. It shows respect. It shows awareness. And most importantly, it shows that you understand the value of trust. Because when a woman allows this level of closeness, she is not just responding physically. She is opening emotionally in a way that cannot be forced or rushed. Now, stepping back and looking at all 7 zones, a clear pattern begins to emerge. These are not techniques, they are not shortcuts or tricks. They are emotional signals. Each one speaks directly to how safe, understood, and valued she feels in your presence. Studies in neuroscience have shown that these areas are highly sensitive, not just physically but emotionally, triggering the release of oxytocin, the hormone responsible for bonding and trust. That's why women don't respond to touch alone. They respond to intention, to attention, and to the energy behind the action. When those elements are present, even the simplest gesture becomes meaningful. Without them, even the most confident action can feel empty. So the real question is not where you touch. It's how you show up when you do. Are you present? Are you aware? Are you genuinely there with her in that moment? Because that is what she feels first, long before anything else. These 7 zones are not buttons you press. They are doors you gently open. And every time you approach them with sincerity, you send a message that matters more than anything else. I see you. I respect you. You matter. If this changed the way you think, subscribe now and start building real connection today.